Well, so here we are talking about the Red Sea, as if you weren't aware. So we just got all kinds of fun stuff that's going on with this. And, it's one of those kind of things where it's like you almost think, okay, well, the Bible said they came to a sea and it parted, and it was makes sense. It's deep, and okay, it looks like that's where it is. But there's so much here that people get into as they're arguing about where was it and how did it happen and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what we've been going through. Just a quick recap. The approach that is being taken, he's put the different views into two basic camps. You have the Egyptian view, which is that the crossing happened closer on the border of Egypt in one of those shallow lakes nearby Egypt. The Hebrew view claims that no, the crossing actually happened over in the Gulf of Aqaba across the Sinai Peninsula. And I think kind of more importantly, the way that it's being approached is rather than just merely nitpicking about place names and the little details, it's like, okay, let's zoom out big picture, look at the pattern of the events that have taken place and which one actually fits into that. I think that's the better way to do it. We've looked at the first four. We're kind of in the middle of the fourth one there about the detour, because apparently they leave, they go a certain way, they're crossing a desert, and then they make a turn, and that's where they come to the ocean or the sea and have to cross it. So where did they leave from? Let's just do a quick little review. What's the name of the place they left from? Ramses, right? And which direction were they going? East, or kind of a southeast sort of direction. And that's about where people stop agreeing. It's what happens after that people get into disagreements. It says that they cross a desert. The question is, which desert did they cross? On the Egyptian view, they say it's this little one over here up by Egypt. It's about 12 miles across. The Hebrew view, it's the Sinai Peninsula. There that is what they crossed. And if you missed on that, you can go back and see why we came to a conclusion we came to, but which one did they cross? Right? All the evidence points to it being the big one. Doesn't actually make much sense that, the journey across the wilderness is 12 miles. Even on the Egyptian view, where they only think there's maybe 20 or 30,000 people, that's not really much of a wilderness to cross. Okay, and then where is it that they were when they made their detour and got trapped in by the land against the sea? Is it up here near the lakes on the edge of Egypt, or is it over here by the Gulf of Aqaba? Of course, we said it doesn't make much sense that it's going to be up there, because how are they going to get trapped and closed in this wide open space? Right, and second of all, why are they running and hiding from the Egyptian military when Egypt just told them to get out and basically, rolled out the red carpet to, don't let the door hit you or the good Lord split you. And so it doesn't make much sense that it would be there. Whereas over there across the Sinai, over by the Gulf of Aqaba, that's some mountainous terrain. You could see where you'd get turned around and closed in over there. So, and then, and at the time, this one just blew my mind. Well, what was one of the reasons why the Gulf of Aqaba has not been traditionally considered for a crossing point? Why did everyone think that it was over by Egypt, either one of the lakes or on the Suez? Because it wasn't on the map. Right, that right there is a map, I believe, from the 1700s. Right, and here's a more current look of how we know the terrain is. Right, you notice what's missing. An entire body of water just isn't on the map. And so for centuries, thousands of years even, people have assumed the crossing happened further westward, over closer to Egypt, either on one of the smaller bodies of water or on the Gulf of Suez. So, I think there's a lesson to be found in that. I don't want to just completely trash, academia and scholarship. Like, you can't trust the experts; they don't know nothing. Well, no, I mean, there's good reason to believe certain things, but you shouldn't just believe things just because those who are supposed to be experts say so. Even if there's a supposed consensus of the experts. Because for centuries, the consensus of the experts missed an entire body of water. And so the Greek-dominated world, looking from their vantage point from the west, looking east, all they saw was the Suez. They didn't see past the Suez and the mountains of the Sinai to know that there was another body of water over there. And so that way of thinking dominated, even after people knew there's another body of water over there. It is just so ingrained in the thinking. So that's just a little word to be cautious of the experts. Because as much as they do know, they don't always know everything. They don't always get it right. Okay. So last week, kind of the big thing that we took a look at was the role of miracles and the kind of naturalistic way of thinking that people adopt. And what was it? What was the reason? Let me think how I want to ask this. What was the point of miracles? Why is it that whenever we talk about the miraculous, right, that it's the big things? I mean, we know, we believe that God can work through the little natural things, but whenever we're talking about miracles, why do we expect and believe the spectacular? Because it's God. Right? Well, what is the point of a miracle? Why does God do miracles? Just because he's a nice guy and wants to help us out? To prove a point to people. Yeah, it is a look at this. He wants to make sure people see what's happening and they know it was him that did it. And so, God, like I said, God can and he does work through natural means. However, like all through the Bible, whenever it talks about miracles, the actual Greek or Hebrew word is actually the word for sign or portent or something, where he's making a point. And so you don't make a point with something little that people misunderstand. So that's one reason why it actually makes more sense that in this defining moment of God delivering his people and establishing the nation of Israel, that it would be something where he's declaring, I am God. So we also looked at the issue of naturalism or empiricism, right? The idea that it's only the concrete physical stuff, what you can feel and touch and see and hear, that's the only stuff that you should believe. We looked at Hume, who basically said, I'm not saying that miracles don't happen. I'm just saying you shouldn't believe them because they're not empirical. Right? It is basically his point of view. But when you stop and think about that, what you're doing is shutting yourself off to an entire section of reality, willfully being ignorant and closed-minded. Whenever you say, no, I can't believe in miracles because it's not physical, natural, see it, touch it, test it. So, okay, that brings us to today. Any questions, thoughts before we get started with this one? Okay, and a reminder, if anyone watching this later on, the video will be edited out for copyright reasons. We'll play it during the live stream, but then I'll edit it out later. But links to be able to view it will be in the description of the video. So here we go. Well, that was fun. So, any thoughts right away before we jump into the questions? Road trip. I like it. Let's go. All in favor? Ayes have it. All right. Sounds like none of them know anything. Well, and whenever it comes to the study of history, right, there's so many things that you have to infer and gaps you got to kind of fill in, which is why the approach where you kind of back out and take a look at the big picture and say, okay, what makes the most sense of the whole thing? I mean, because you could argue all day long, what makes the most sense to be, this is Migdol. No, this is Migdol. No, it's this fortress. No, it's this rock outcropping. No, this city over here is that. Well, no, it refers to this. Well, Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds, so it must be this shallow lake over here. Well, no, So rather than getting into the ping pong match of those kind of things where we don't actually have, an ancient map, that says here's this place, here's this place, here's this place. There's a lot of this we're having to infer. Okay, so let's get into this. On the Hebrew approach, right? So we're talking the Aqaba, deep water, kind of view. Why did they have to turn? What made them turn? Right? Yeah, God told them to turn. Exodus 14, 1 and 2 says, Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. So God told them to turn, right? Which is quite a bit of different thing than what the other view says, right? Well, what does the other view say the reason they had to turn? Because there was a fort in their way. There was a big old Egyptian army. So they had to turn to avoid the Egyptian army. But does that make sense? Why would they be avoiding an Egyptian army? The Egyptians just told them to get out. They don't have to fear the army. They can just walk right past them. Whereas, and then there's the idea that, they make that turn, then they get all trapped. And as he was saying, it makes a lot more sense that they're going to get shut in by the wilderness and trapped in the mountainous region around the Gulf of Aqaba. So in this one, he mentioned, and we've mentioned it before, that there's biblical evidence of which body of water the Bible is referring to whenever it mentions Yam Suf, or the Red Sea. Right? What was the reason that they gave, that the Bible says that the Red Sea is the Gulf of Aqaba? What's that? Had to do with Solomon. Yeah, there's other passages. Specifically, 1 Kings 9:26. It says, King Solomon also built a fleet of ships at Ezion Geber, which is near Elath, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. That gives us a whole bunch of names that we can test things against. By the way, when it says Red Sea, in the Hebrew, that is Yam Suf. And so the same name for the sea they crossed is what is used in this passage as well. And it says that he built some ships on a body of water that's near the land of Edom. Well, we know where Edom is. That's that area below the Dead Sea. Okay, so what's going to make more sense? That he's building a fleet of ships over here on the Gulf of Aqaba, or that he's building ships in some lakes over by Egypt that's nowhere near Edom? I think that answers pretty obvious, right? That whenever the Bible talks about the Red Sea or Yam Suf, it's talking about the Gulf of Aqaba. So there's people who say, okay, well, that is the area, that is the body of water, that is the region. It's not over by Egypt, but they have a kind of hybrid approach. What are the reasons why they say that it's not, down there at that beach? It's not these other views, right? We have basically three different areas that people propose. That one down there at the southern bit, we'll talk about that, I think, next week. But why is it that people favor that northern one with some shallower waters? You can take God out of the equation. Well, they say, no, God's in it. Yeah, he's just, Yeah, that one in Timnah, where it was a lake that would be a seasonal lake filled with water in the spring, that it has all the different landmarks that the guy was saying. But really, it comes down to the depth of water. I mean, this is one of the things that is a sticking point for a lot of people. They look at the Gulf of Aqaba and they go, no, can't be. Specifically, though, even people who are trying, they're Christians, they're believers, they're trying to kind of figure out what the Bible says, right? They look at the Bible and they see, okay, well, in Exodus 14, it says that Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. And they say, a wind that is going to be strong enough to move deep water, you can't walk through that. That it would be too strong of a wind for the people to walk through. Is the claim, right? They say it's not naturally possible to do. Well, that's taking, like, well, yeah. Well, they're taking God out of the mix, even if they try to say, well, he's behind the scenes working through, right? This is the same thing people always, talk about, like when it comes to things like evolution. Well, it's God behind it driving evolution. Okay. Whenever the idea is, what was it? I heard someone say it, if you were to ask me, how do you boil water? And I say, well, you fill a pot with water and then you throw in a leprechaun and put the lid on. What's the unnecessary part there? Right? The leprechaun. You don't have to have a leprechaun to boil water. You just put the pot on the water. Well, how did the water part? Oh, it was shallow water and the wind pushed it aside because God did it. Well, what's the unnecessary part there? God. Right? They're trying to find explanations where you don't need God. Even though they'll say, well, but God was involved. Well, but we've already said that when it comes to miracles, especially this kind of miracle, God's making sure he's involved and he's the one that did it. Okay. So that brings us to the popular spot, the vacation destination for all those fleeing Egypt, Nuweiba Beach. So what were some of the pros and cons? Let's go with the pros. What are the positives that this location has going for it? Right, it's the deeper water, bigger miracle. Right, that view that's what God's doing. He's making a point. What else does this fit? Being lost in the wilderness, that's some wilderness you can get lost in. Some canyons and gorges, twists and turns. Yeah, it's a place where you could easily get trapped by the Egyptian army. Right, these other locations, you can run some other way. Right, you're not pinned in somewhere. You can know they're coming and you can go somewhere else. right? That's one thing I was noticing in all those other in the other diagrams they had, where it's like they were coming in like a pincher maneuver. It's like, well, that's not what the Bible describes. The Bible describes it was all behind them, and then God divided them. Well, if they're all split up, and so yeah, fits that better. It's the right body of water, right? We just said. It fits with the pattern of events, right? Remember, we're not just nitpicking about some little details and place names. We're taking a look at the whole big picture and what fits the best. And this one is fitting with it. What are some of the negatives about this location? No, one that specifically got mentioned was the personality it's associated with. In a lot of circles, especially scholarly circles and some Christian circles, this gentleman, Ron White, is not a very popular person. It's one of those things where just mention of his name automatically evokes skepticism for some people. And it kind of makes sense because it kind of stretches the bounds of credulity. Because here's one guy, he's an amateur archaeologist. He does this part-time whenever he's able to. And he claims to, aside from having discovered Nueva Beach, he claims he has discovered the location of Noah's Ark. He claims to have discovered the Ark of the Covenant. He claims to have discovered the location of the real Mount Sinai. He claims to have discovered the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. In addition to those rather kind of popular known things, he also says that he has discovered Noah's grave, altars built by Moses in Exodus 24. The actual rock that Moses struck, where the water came out, says he discovered the cave that is the tomb of the patriarchs. Right? He says that he has discovered the bones of giant pre-flood people and many, many, many other things as well. On the website I saw listed over 100 discoveries. Yeah. One guy who is basically, he's an amateur archaeologist, and he's doing this kind of like taking his vacation time, and he's just doing it part-time aside from his job. And so that's the kind of thing that makes you go, and so I understand the skepticism. So that's one of the, negatives going against it. However, I will mention people who would reject this based on who is claiming it, that's bad thinking. That's what's in logic, they call that the genetic fallacy, where you accept or dismiss something based on where it comes from. Not based on whether or not it's true, not based on the evidence, not based on the argument, but because of where it comes from. And we can all fall into that kind of thinking, right? Where we have someone that we just do not trust, right? Depending on your political persuasion, there's probably some news channel that if they say it, you're just going to assume the opposite. Right? It's easy to fall in that kind of thing. And that's bad thinking. You should accept or dismiss things based on whether or not, the evidence bears them out. And so, but people are people. And so the association with Ron Wyatt does have that effect on some people. Another kind of, negative, you could say, when it comes to the place names, right? Because they say there's these 4 place names that you have to locate. Wherever the crossing is, it involves these 4 places, right? And so when it comes to the crossing here at Nueva Beach, what are the 4 places? Well, first you have the sea, right? We got a sea. That one's obvious. Yam Suf, and it matches. So, that's cool. But what about the others? You have this Pi Hahiroth, which is translated as mouth of the gorge, right? They say, oh, well, we got a gorge there. So, all right, mouth of the gorge. Migdol, he says, no, it's not a towering building. Migdol refers to the towering mountains, right? And then this Baal Zephon, which literally translates to Lord of the North, even though Baal or Baal, however you pronounce that, is the name of a Canaanite god, it literally means Lord. So I guess the argument here is that it's not anything associated with the Canaanite god. It's just something associated with, something of the north. And he said that's the entrance that faces north. And I'm like, that one actually seems kind of, I'm not convinced by that. It's like, well, these other places, these other claims, I mean, they got like actual structures and cities and places they point to, right? Things that have carvings and other archaeological things they've discovered. When it comes to these place names, the Nuweiba Beach one's looking not quite as strong as the others. Doesn't have the specificity. Is the fact that some of these place names at Nuweiba Beach are less specific than others, is that a negative? Is that a slight? Is that a bad one against this location? Yeah, not a deal breaker. I mean, it's like, okay, it could be. I mean, it'd be really nice if they were real clear cut and specific and laid out, and not having to, take these kind of inferences and, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, plus, different people find specificity more compelling. Like they want it to be specific, detailed, without a doubt. Unfortunately, that's not really how history works very often, but that'd certainly be better. But, like you said, that's not a deal breaker. I mean, it'd be really nice if it, especially if there's like a plate, like a signpost right here. Here's Migdol, right? I mean, that'd be great. Here's the thing, though. Whenever it comes to language, especially biblical Hebrew, words have all kinds of different meanings. And when it comes to biblical Hebrew, that's what was referred to as a high context language, a high context culture, where there was so much tradition and cultural norm built into so much that everybody does that that a lot of the meaning a word would carry what was known by the culture. So someone who's not in that culture, they just hear a word, they go, Migdol means tower. Well, okay, but it could have a wide range of meanings. We do actually kind of have this in English, right? English, our culture tends to be a low context culture. We prefer our language to be very specific, very precise, but even our language, right, doesn't happen all the time. If you see the word B-O-W, what does that mean? Bow, right? Like a bow and arrow? Or a gift, right? You tie a bow on a present, right? Is it bow or is it bow? Like you could take a bow or the bow of a ship, right? I mean, so you see the word by itself and it can mean all these kind of different things. You got to figure the context. And sometimes the context of where it's written, the sentence and paragraph can give you some insight. But sometimes you just got to know from the culture and what would be in people's minds. And so, yeah. So the fact that they're not as specific as we might like, well, not a deal breaker. The real point is the big picture, what actually fits. Because if it fits, okay, maybe we're not exactly sure what Migdol or Baal Zephon is, but it fits. Okay, one little thing I wanted to mention, because they brought it up in the video, what is the role of science? Does science have a role to play in all this? By the way, y'all know who that is? Y'all know where that's from? Right? Bonus points, anybody who knows where that's from? It's from the music video for Blinded Me with Science. And that is actually, his name is Magnus Pike. He was a British biochemist. He actually specialized in nutritional science and chemistry. And he was in a music video, but that's fun. Yeah. Which actually, back in because he died in the 90s. And so I think back in like 60s or 70s, he was a big, over in Britain, big TV personality, a big science personality. I guess he'd be like, our modern day, Bill Nye before he went nuts, or Neil deGrasse Tyson, these science personalities that are on TV talking about science. That was him, 60 years ago. So anyway, what role does science have? Does science have a role in figuring this stuff out? It's severely limited, right? Because whenever we talk about science, we're talking about a hypothesis and testing it, and science is built on the idea of you have to be able to observe, you have to be able to measure, and you have to be able to have repetition of your experiments to repeat results. Well, when you're talking about history, can you observe history? No. Can you measure history? No. Can you repeat the results of historical events? No. Okay, so science isn't actually the go-to method whenever it comes to historical things. There's a little bit here and there, a scientific, discovery or fact can give you a data point as you try to figure something out. But generally, by and large, when it comes to history, science is not the go-to place. Okay, so any other thoughts, questions about that? Brush up on your 80s music. Heck yeah. So here's one thing, a little life lesson from this. Stop thinking about this. The Israelites end up, and in case you're not aware, I favor the Nuweiba Beach location as the actual crossing point. The Israelites end up out on that beach, surrounded by the mountains, cornered by the sea, with the Egyptian army bearing down on them. All seems hopeless, all seems lost. And what brought them there? God. They ended up out on that beach, trapped in the mountains at the mercy of the Egyptians, because God told them to go there. God shows up and does a miracle and delivers them. But here's the thing. There's so often in our lives and so many things that I hear critics and skeptics and people who got disillusioned and walked away from church, the things they shake their fist about, because God led them somewhere or allowed something to happen to them, and they turn their back on it. Sometimes God leads us into the places where only He can deliver us, so that we would trust Him to do so. There's a song by Rich Mullins. It's called Hard to Get. Really good song. But there's a line in there where it says, I can't see where you're leading me unless you've led me here to where I'm lost enough to let myself be led. Right? And there's times where the things that God is telling us, not only does it not make sense, it looks like the absolute wrong, but we just got to trust. That's what faith is, where you look and you go, okay, God, I don't know why you're telling me to turn off the main road and go off into these canyons. Okay. That's where you're going, so that's where I'll go. Okay. Sermon's done. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, you could picture that if there was no Egyptian army, if everything was just whatever, and they walk out and it's like, okay, the ocean parted. This is freaky. Okay, now God says go across. Say what? I'm good over here. I'll stay on the beach. Hey, you go across. Hey, you go see what it's like. Come back and tell me. I'm staying on the beach, right? So yeah, sometimes God will put that in your life to push you on to something else. Yeah, absolutely.